Greetings, friends. It's time once more for In Other News. And this In Other News is not going to be about a single specific news story, but a specific global theme that's happening right now, and that is elections are happening all over the planet with some very, very interesting and impacting results. Let's entitle this one Election Rejection. Ha! And maybe that's not the most appropriately titled one because there are some places where there's not a rejection happening, but it is a common thing. And this idea that there's a whole lot of political turnover happening this year is something I've talked about in former podcast in a World Leader in Review, I believe, right at the beginning of the year. 2012 is a banner year in terms of that most major countries are changing over, or at least holding elections for a possible changeover of political leadership, including the United States at the end of 2012. Russia's going down today. In fact, that's what reminded me to do this. Election Rejection podcast is that today, Sunday, March 4th, the Russians are going to the polls to vote for their next president, which will likely be Vladimir Putin, but hold on to that thought for a minute. China's going to select new leadership for the beginning of next year. Right there, this is kind of the three big titans on the planet Earth. But there's a whole host of elections and political turnover happening in other major and minor world powers all over the place. So big year, and it looks like the theme so far is rejection in terms of people are voting against the status quo if they're in a place that has a vote. Now, having said that, let's get to a place that immediately did a rejection, and this is a follow-up from the previous podcast. If you saw the previous In Other News from Senegal, and if you didn't see that, or if you did, give me a shout out and tell me if you like that or not. A follow-up to that news story about the president there who was running for a re-election, and he got the Constitution changed so he could run for a third term, which reeks of political corruption and all this other stuff, which is a very common theme in Africa. And that dude's name was Abdoulaye Wade. Abdoulaye Wade. It's spelled like Wade, but pronounced Wad. And the follow-up to that is that because of the street protest and the unhappiness in the Senegalese population, and people were saying this is corruption, this is terrible, we want real democracy, we want change. And indeed, enough people voted for other candidates in the Senegalese election a week ago that it has to go to a runoff. And what that means, this is confusing for Americans, because many other democracies and many other parts of the planet, they have 3 or 4 or 5 people running for president. I know. It sounds crazy. It sounds like democracy. It sounds crazy to Americans. They're like, that's weird. Hey, here's what I want you to understand. No, our system is the weird one. To only ever have 2 people running for president is the exception, not the rule. So in other democracies and other parts of the planet, you may have 5 dudes running for president. And ladies, but it's mostly dudes. And in most of these societies, and Senegal's one of them, and actually Russia is another one. Back to current events. In places that they have multiple people running for president, there's usually some sort of cutoff, some sort of percentage that you have to capture a certain percentage of the popular vote in order to progress to the next round. And you have to win like 50% outright. So if you get 50% of the vote, period, you win. That's it. If 51% of the people vote for you, you're the president. However, that doesn't happen usually when you have 5 or 6 or 10 people running for office. So there's usually some sort of cutoff, like 35% or 40%. If you capture, say, 30% of the vote, and maybe some other dude captures 30%, and then the other candidates only get like 5 or 10% each, then they take the top 2 people who achieved the 30% cutoff, and then they have what's called a runoff. So in Senegal, Wad did not win outright. A couple of his opposition people gained enough popular public support, so they're having a runoff now in the Senegalese election. That's good news for democracy. It may end up that Wad wins anyway, but at least they've gone through more of a democratic process for this dude who changed the Constitution so he could run again. So we'll continue to follow what's going on in Senegal, where election rejection outright stopped Wad from winning a third term unchallenged. So good for you, Senegal. Keep up the good democratic work. Now let's turn to Russia, where the election rejection is likely to not take effect because here again, Sunday, March 4th, the Russians are going to the polls to vote. And it is extremely likely that Vladimir Putin, another leader who helped change his own constitution so he could run for a third term, he likely will win. And he will likely win outright, unlike Wad in Senegal, it is extremely likely that Putin will get the probably 50% needed to completely win outright. There are, I believe, 4 other people running for president in Russia today, too. None of them are serious challengers. None of them. I mean, one of them is a billionaire who owns, the New Jersey Nets? Is that an NBA team? He's a big businessman. He's got the clout to do it, but no one in Russia is really taking any of them too seriously. Does that make sense? And for all of his faults, and for all the political trials and tribulations happening within Russia now, Putin still does maintain a solid 40% of people that would probably take up arms to support him. I mean, that kind of support, not just, yeah, I'll vote for him. I mean, diehard Putin fans, probably 40%. It may be closer to 50 or 60. So, without any real viable alternative, and I'm going to say this in defense of Putin. Everybody hates him all of a sudden. But in defense of Putin, the country is doing much better 12 years after he took office than it was the 12 years before he took office. So anytime you have a candidate who can just kind of make that general claim, are you doing better now? I've been in power. But again, Putin was president from 2000 to 2008. Then he stepped down and became the prime minister from 2008 to 2012. Now he's stepping back up to become president again. And he can make the claim, aren't you slightly better off than you were? And for most Russians, that is true. So all of the protests you've heard about against Putin in the last 6 months, or actually less than that, this is since November, all of the protests, yes, they're valid. Yes, I respect people's political opinions and rights in Russia. However, they are the minority, and there's no getting around that because the average Russian, I believe, can say, yes, I am slightly better off than I was before, pre-Putin. So he has that going for him. Now, is it political corruption? He helped change the Constitution a little bit? Yeah, probably. And what they did was not change the Constitution to allow for a third term, but they changed the Constitution to change the presidential term itself from 4 years to, was it 5 years? Can I get a Russian shout on this? They either change it from a 4-year term to a 5-year term and possibly a 6-year term. I think it's 6. And in changing the term length itself, then that allowed Putin to run again because even though he already ran twice, he can say, oh, well, that was under the old rules. This is the new rule, so I can run again. And it is possible he could do 2 more terms under this new 6-year rule. So he could be in office for another decade and beyond. Now, what are the repercussions of this? Certainly, because of the protests, the first time ever that this ever happened in the 12 years that Putin's been in office, this has rattled him. It's rattled the top authorities in the Our Russia political party, which dominates the politics in Russia. It's certainly making them think twice about how, or if they've taken the public for granted, it's certainly make them think twice about their priorities in terms of what they're going to do in the coming term in office. They're probably going to have to focus more on corruption, political and economic. They're going to have to be more responsive to the people who are protesting against them. I think that's going to happen. In broader terms, since most of us don't live in Russia, perhaps you're not interested in this, in broader terms, it actually also plays out on the world stage in that Putin, quite honestly, is just no fan of the United States. There's no nice way to put it. I don't say he hates the United States, but he is extremely distrustful of the United States. And the fact that he's going to be in office for the next 5 to 6 to 10 to 12 does play into how world events are going to unfold. What I mean by this is, Putin, when he came in office in the 2000, he just kind of sat tight, didn't say a whole lot, and was saying, yeah, Russia's hurting, and Russia's crippled economically and politically, and so we're going to try to get back on track. He didn't really challenge the United States too much. He went along with a lot of the early Bush-era stuff that was happening in the U.S.-Russian relation. By the end of his first run in office, by 2008 when he was leaving the presidency, he outright did not like George Bush, did not like the United States, and was saying openly that Russia feels threatened by the expansion of NATO, Russia feels threatened by the NATO U.S.-sponsored anti-missile defense shield, which they have always said they think is targeted at Russia. Now Putin is saying, right now, not in 2008, but in 2012, he's saying, I think the United States is trying to maintain its a global hegemony and imperialistic power, and we're not going to allow that. He has said he thinks the United States and Team West has been interfering in Russian politics. So, I mean, you have a whole host of things that are lining up to make it look like the U.S.-Russian relationship is probably going to go south in the coming years. I haven't even mentioned things like U.S. and NATO intervention into Libya, which the Russians are still furious at themselves for not preventing. And now you have the situation in Syria, where Russia is a friend of Syria, Russia is supporting Syria, Russia is selling arms to Syria, while the U.S. and Team West and a lot of folks at the UN are totally pissed at Russia about this, and Russia's standing by this. So, again, that's why it's important to know world leaders and what's going on. This will help you understand the unfolding relationship between these two powers, which is likely to not get very much better when Putin reassumes the presidency, probably later today, by tomorrow at the latest. Okay, so that's what's going on in Russia with election rejection. Again, Putin's not getting rejected, but challenged for the first time in 12 years of his tenure in office in Russia. Okay, where else has election rejection happened? Iran. Hello, Iran. This is a strange election rejection, though. What happened was President Ahmadinejad, which we're going to probably be saying soon, I need a job. President, I'm going to need a job. He wasn't running for office. He ran for his second term just a couple years ago and won. And that was the one that was kind of, had the green movement. There was a kind of a mini revolution where people took to the streets and said the election was unfair. And they got crushed. So it wasn't a direct election for Ahmadinejad. However, what's been going on in Iran is that it's been a parliamentary election. You call it the Congress here in the United States. So major seats up for grabs in the Iranian parliament. And everyone was thinking that Ahmadinejad's political party was going to win, his faction. Okay? What happened was he got crushed. His party just got wiped out in the Iranian elections. Well, what party won then? A party that's actually more extreme conservative right than his political party. And this is what's been going on in Iran for a couple years now, is a power struggle between Ahmadinejad and the ultimate power, Ayatollah Khamenei. Okay, Ali Khamenei, the supreme ruler, supreme head honcho. Of course, he's a religious figure. You know Iran is a theocracy, so he does have real ultimate power. So why would there be a political struggle? Well, because Ahmadinejad, for years, had been riding on a populist platform of rah, Iran's awesome, we're going to make a nuclear weapon, we have nukes, we're awesome, we're going to kick ass. And he had a lot of popular support, and perhaps a little too much. And the puppet masters in the religious council around Khamenei started to feel threatened that this dude, this elected dude, was having perhaps too much impact and too much power within the society. And here's what's hilarious about it. They're all right-wing. All of them. So what, in this bizarre, almost, I'm not going to call it a fake election, but, Iran's a theocracy. It's not a democracy. They vote. They have a parliament and a president, and they vote for them. But the real ultimate power is held by that religious group of clerics. Manifest itself supremely in Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. So it doesn't matter who wins anything. Those are the guys that really have the power. It's not a true democracy. And what's even more bizarre about it is if it wasn't a theocracy, ruled by religion, it would be closer to a one-party state than a true democracy. And that is, there's only this one, and they're all on the conservative right. There are several political parties that, as outsiders, none of us can tell the difference between. They're all hardcore, ultra-conservative. And so this political fracas, this power struggle for 2 years has been between the ultimate hardcore right-wing conservatives, the Khamenei crew, and just slightly left of that, the kind of radical ultimate right-wing political party of President Ahmadinejad. So if that's a power struggle, it's a hilarious one as an outsider, because there's no real difference between these two. In terms of their philosophy, their foreign policy, domestic policy, there's really no difference. It was kind of just a leadership struggle. And that has now come to a conclusion this week when they had elections. And Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, his political party just got wiped out. Even his sister lost a position as mayor of some small town, or maybe it was a big town, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I just want you to understand the bigger picture here of, that political struggle is done, and Iran has gone even further to the conservative right now. Perhaps no big surprises. How is this going to affect foreign policy? Iran's role in the region, Iran's role in the world, Iran getting embargoed, Iran developing nuclear weapons. How does it affect that? It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all because, again, they're all over there on the extreme right. And it's not going to change any major policies whatsoever. And by the way, Iran is hurting right now because of these embargoes. Inflation is getting out of control. And by the way, Ahmadinejad has been blamed for all that, and the political leadership of Khomeini kind of pinned all the blame on him, even though they're not going to change any of the policies. But they're like, oh, food prices are out of control, and this embargo by the West, those imperialist pigs, it's all Ahmadinejad's fault. So that's probably why his political party lost. Again, they're not going to change anything, so it's kind of a funny tactic. But hey, that's pseudo-democracy in Iran. That's how they roll. Let me finish up with just a couple of other quick ones, though. And these actually have not happened yet, but the first one's happening soon, and let's shift to France, where Nicolas Sarkozy is going to get trounced in the upcoming elections. He is a just slightly conservative right politician, and for those of you who have had my classes, you know that there has been a theme across all of Europe of people getting more conservative, political parties getting slightly more conservative, and the kind of, again, conservative side of the spectrum winning political elections everywhere. The leaders of the UK, of France, of Germany, of Italy, you just kind of go down the line. They're all conservative. Of Spain now, they went conservative. So this has been a major theme. And it looks like Sarkozy's poor performance in France is going to be the first major challenge to that shift to the conservative right in Europe, because he's going to lose. I mean, who knows with politics? But it's going to take some fourth quarter Hail Mary pass miracle for this guy to win. And things just keep stacking up to make him look worse and worse and worse. So what do I mean by that? He's been in the news just this last week. He's being seriously challenged by the Socialist Party, center-left, Socialist of France. And France is just in terrible shape. Economically, they suck. Then they have the cultural frictions within the society. And Sarkozy's been playing on those. So under his reign, they passed the anti-burqa law, and there's talk of anti-immigration laws. And if you follow current events of this semester, Sarkozy is the one who pushed hard to get the Armenian genocide thing recognized. So they had a law temporarily passed that if you denied the Armenian genocide that was supposedly perpetrated by the Turks 100 years ago, you would go to jail. I mean, quite frankly, I got nothing against Armenians, but to throw people in jail for free speech, that's problematic from various fronts, and it actually got thrown out on those grounds out of the French Supreme Court. They're like, no, this law's out. As soon as the law got thrown out, and this is last week, Sarkozy himself personally went and contacted some right-wing senators like, let's push it through again. Let's go. And it's like, this sounds like, it's a very bizarre way to run a campaign, but that's what Sarkozy wants to do, and that's what he's doing. And on top of that, he has been hijacking his opponents' platforms in terms of one of his socialist opponents, the guy who's probably going to win, was like visiting some old steel towns and saying, hey, we're going to try to get outside investment into this steel town and get the steel industry invigorated to create jobs. And apparently a week later, Sarkozy went there and like, yep, well, the government's doing this. We're gonna infuse money in here to get these jobs going. And it's like, dude, your opponent just did that. And he was in news at that very town that I'm speaking of because he was surrounded by pro-left, pro-socialist forces and actually got holed up in a bar where people were throwing rocks and eggs at the window. I mean, he got trapped in a bar by political opposition. And it's just one of those things like, wow, that doesn't happen often. And this really, I think, speaks to the tone on the streets of France right now, which is just really against this guy and his political party. I got nothing against him personally, but it's for good reason that a lot of the French people are pissed. He, like so many other, I think, failing conservatives and ultra-conservatives across the planet, are clutching at social issues in an effort to scare people. It's like, you need to vote for me again, or Islamic terrorism is going to come, or this is going to happen, or, cultural this. The same thing with the abortion issue in the United States, or what am I trying to say? What's the big pill debate now that everybody in the United States has got their panties in a bunch about, and Rush Limbaugh called some college girl a prostitute for taking anti-child baby pills, whatever the hell they're called. Whenever you see social issues like that take the forefront, that's usually an act of desperation of people. They got nothing politically or economically of value to say, so they clutch upon a social issue that they can get people riled up against or for. And that looks like what's going on in Sarkozy's France. Because, again, nothing against the guy, but France is in trouble, and he's been in office for 8 years, so there's not a whole lot of people to point the finger at besides him. And it's very likely that the election rejection is coming for him. I believe the French elections are next month. No one can see how he's going to win it, and myself included. So probably saying adieu to Nicolas Sarkozy in France very soon. The last one is not an election that's even happening in the very near future, but I believe by the end of this year, Hugo Chavez is also going up for re-election in Venezuela. And I guess this will be his 10th or 20th election. I don't know. I have for years defended Venezuela as a democracy because they do have a vote, and they're usually overseen by the OAS, who says they're free and fair. But this guy's been in power so long and changed the Constitution so many times, he truly is starting to play into his critics who say that he's a dictator who has seized all ultimate power and is doing everything in his power to crush the opposition and maintain his power, and it's getting harder every year to try to see how that's not true. Now, the reason I bring him up is not because I think he has any threat of losing. He, like Vladimir Putin in Russia, does have a very large base support. Probably 40 or 50% of Venezuelans love Hugo Chavez. Why? Because it's a country that has a lot of poverty, and since he's been in power, he has tried to reduce that poverty, mostly by redistributing wealth. Socialism, okay? Socialism / borderline communism. And a lot of people in Venezuela apparently have benefited. That's why he still has a fairly sizable support base. Venezuela is still plagued with lots of troubles, though. Crime is the worst in the Western Hemisphere. The murder rate's like one of the worst in the world. The infrastructure is crumbling, and they have all this oil wealth that seemingly is not really helping diversify their economy. So Venezuela is extremely troubled. I myself have been amazed that he has maintained such popular support, but that's not even why I'm finishing my election rejection rant with Hugo. Hugo has been diagnosed with cancer, now going on for like 8 months, and he's gone to Cuba 2 or 3 or 4 times to receive treatment. He thought he had beat it, and then another tumor or growth showed up, and he's in Cuba right now receiving treatment. All the best to him. I don't wish ill on too many world leaders, and not him. I think he's a goofball of a leader, but I don't wish him to die. But here's why I'm bringing it up. There's no substitute for Hugo. There's no Hugo Light. There's no Hugo Vice President. I'm sure there's somebody in that position, but they're of no known value. So it's problematic for Venezuelans in terms of if he doesn't run for office this year, if his health gets too bad, that's probably bad news for everybody because there's no replacement. There's no one in his political party that has his, presence and leadership skills and popular support. And there's no one in the opposition either. So I only bring this up in terms of not making fun of Hugo, but his health is now a very big question mark, and that spells problems for Venezuela either way. If people are going to elect a candidate for another 4 or 5 years that they're not sure is going to live, that's problematic. And of course, his political opponents are going to try to make hay out of that, and it's probably a lot of hay to be made. And even if it's true that he is in dire straits and he has to pull himself out of office, he has to be honest and says, hey, I'm really sick and I cannot run for another 5 years of your presidency. There is no one to take his place, and Venezuela could very rapidly devolve into political infighting that could get very nasty. So, believe it or not, as much as a lot of us in the West and us true democracy lovers make fun of Hugo Chavez, his departure in an untimely manner like this because of ill health would probably be disastrous for Venezuela and would have repercussions in the region as well. Again, let's hope he's okay. He's already come out and said today they have pictures of him recuperating in Cuba, and he's saying, no, I'm fine. He's twittering. apparently he tweets like 10 million times a day. He's twittering saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But of course, that's what you would expect him to do. So that's no real indication of the truth. So, will he be rejected by the voters? Likely not. But will he be rejected by health? Possibly. So another election rejection situation unfolding in Venezuela that would have regional and global consequences, as do all of the elections that we've now talked about in the last 25 minutes. And I hope you learned a little bit more about the major rundown of elections that are happening across the country right this second. Probably at this point I could say congratulations to Vladimir Putin. I'm not so sure which way Senegal's going to go. I have increasing suspicions that Nicolas Sarkozy is getting ready to get his ass retired, and we'll see about all the rest. And that's all I got for now with election rejection news in other news.